It's a beautiful night. If there was ever a night to be outside, it's a beautiful night. I'm honored that you would come and listen a little bit. I've spent my whole career pretty much trying to answer one question, and that is, how do we help people be healthy? How do we do that? And so tonight I'm going to give you, first off, just a little bit of perspective about where we are, how we've gotten here, and lastly, kind of how we're going to get out of this mess. So again, it's not that I give just a little bit of thought to this. I spend my entire day, every single day, looking at this question and trying to answer this in a way that people can really change their lives. I even left my full tenured professor job at BYU to engage in this full time on my own. So I'm committed to doing this, and I would have never quit my job if I didn't think this was possible. So let me just take you on a little bit of a journey quickly, just for perspective. If you've ever been to Cleveland, Ohio, there's a river in Cleveland, Ohio. It goes right through the middle of the river. It's called the Cuyahoga River. In 1976, the Cuyahoga River burst into flames. Okay, this is a river. The river in the Cuyahoga burst into flames. It burned warehouses, homes. It took about 3 weeks to get the fire out. Now, this is the river that burst into flames. The people who lived there fought and fought and fought the river. It had been like this for a long time. This is 1976, when we first got these pictures that showed up in Time magazine. Well, the people who worked in this area worked at the factories, and the waste disposal policies of the day was you just dump whatever you needed to the river. Since 1841, the river had burst into flames 11 times. Out of every 12 years, it would burst into flames, they'd get it out. It burst into flames, they'd get it out. Spontaneously combusting. People needed the jobs, they just ignored the river. People made a lot of money. In fact, the Industrial Revolution was built on the factories around this river. There was a lot of politicians who were very happy with the economy. All the jobs, all the families, all the work. The river was just kind of a side effect of what was going on. Well, it took this picture from the Time magazine for us to finally pass the Environmental Protection Act, the EPA, to change this river. Today, the river looks really good. It's been cleaned up. Now, I'm sharing this with you because this is just a metaphor. It's very similar to our health. If you consider our health like the river, we are right now bursting into flames, metaphorically. If you were in Cleveland and you were around the Cuyahoga River, who wants to keep the river the same? Who wants to keep the river like this? Who wants to maintain that status quo? Well, the people making money. So we have this two sides of this battle. The people, the local businesses, the employees, the politicians, we've been putting stuff in the river for 100 years. What's the big deal? It's acceptable. It's what everybody does around the world. It's the way we do things. Who would like to change the river? Well, and why do they want to change the river? Well, there's no money to be made in fixing the river. There's really a grassroots effort. There's people who care and people who want a desire for something else. So let's switch the metaphor now to your health, where we are right now. Who's happy with our current culture and our current diabetes, obesity rates, our current food source? Who's happy with the current health river right now? Well, businesses who make money on the current system. Employees, many employees make their living doing this. Our farmers all across the Great Plains receive federal dollars to grow corn, to make high fructose corn syrup, to feed their families. It's good for business. Politicians are pretty happy where it's at right now because businesses are growing, hospitals are packed, the system's working really good for a lot of people. So you come to a meeting today saying, well, I'm not really happy where it's at. I'd like to change some things. Well, what's in it for you? Well, first off, there's no money in this. I've often said there is no money in disease prevention. There's money in disease treatment. You can say, well, we have colonoscopy and mammography and pap smears. That's not prevention, that's early detection. There's no money in prevention. The money in our society today is in our current culture, how we've got here, and in the treatment of the disease that we all get. So we've got this problem here. To make this real, let's take a vote. Let's take a little poll here. I want you to think of a food that you crave. Not just like, not that a food that you prefer. I want you to think about a food that you absolutely, really, 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 really like. Picture it in your mind. Anybody want to share with us what your food is?
Potato chips.
Potato chips. It's a good one. Potato chips. Some ice cream. Not all ice cream. Some ice cream. Some of it.
Chocolate.
Chocolate.
Bread.
Bread? Just plain bread.
Any kind.
I heard beer the other day. Really? You just crave beer? I never got that. It came from this very nice young lady. She said, I crave beer. I said, okay, I'm good.
Radishes and celery.
Radishes and celery. Okay, we have one oddball in the group. One oddball in the group.
The one who's helping.
He can explain.
Eggplant and jade
Strawberry shortcake.
Strawberry shortcake.
Oh, tomatoes, I love them.
She loves tomatoes. Okay, we got some strange people in the group here. Think about the food that most of you thought about. You tell me which of the 3 items are in your food. Salt, sugar, and fat. Or all 3.
All 3.
Chocolate, we have sugar and fat. What about my ice cream? Sugar and fat. What about my potato chips? Salt and fat. How about pizza? Salt and fat. And to make the pizza go down well, we add soda. It's the trifecta of flavors. Now, I'm going to joke with this for a minute because this is very real. I checked into a hotel room really late and they had a hot chocolate chip cookie for me at the counter when I came in. You've probably seen that before. I ate it. It was delicious. It was therapeutic. It transformed my stress. It changed me who I was. There's a reason why you crave salt, sugar, and fat. It is because for 100,000 years, the human species didn't have access to salt, sugar, and fat. We never had salt. We had sugar only from fruit for a very short season, a couple of weeks. And fat, we had some from animals, but that was it. We have combined and processed our food so that we maximize the addictive flavors. So you will crave some of these foods. My favorite food? Bacon. It's salty and it's fatty. For some reason, I just crave it. I don't eat it very often, but it's the same thing. So the real problem in all of this culture that has changed for us, is that we now have these new foods that maximize our desires for salt, sugar, and fat. Really? Part of a healthy breakfast? I mean, really? It's not what it used to be. How about Cocoa Puffs? Salt and sugar. And if you look at the side of Cocoa Puffs, we see the endorsement of the American Heart Association. So if I understand this correctly, the American Heart Association is endorsing Cocoa Puffs as a healthy breakfast food. How in the world could the American Heart Association endorse Cocoa Puffs? Well, it's about the money.
Look at that ingredient list.
It's about the money. General Mills loves the endorsement. American Heart Association makes $20,000 a year per product that they use the endorsement on. It is a win for General Mills, win for the American Heart Association, lose for you. Because you're associating these foods with an authoritative figure, and you just want to be healthy. You think you are, but you've been deceived. This is on a package. My son Landon, he's 16. This food is to be enjoyed as part of an active, healthy lifestyle. He bought this at Reams. Really? Soft and packaged sour candies, part of a healthy breakfast. If you want to be healthy and you want to be an American, we've got to have lots of burgers and lots of fries. This is all American food. So what we have now is a very, very different culture. A culture in which the foods that we eat have dramatically changed from where they were for 100,000 years. And just a recent phenomena, we now have a very different food culture. So that I can walk across the street, right here at this church, I can walk across the street and see that the school district wins, Pepsi wins, and your students win. Why? Because I can fill those machines and fill them and fill them and fill them again. Because the school district wins, Pepsi wins, and your children consume food full of salt, sugar, and fat. Okay, the river is on fire. Many, many people are very, very happy with the burning fire right now. It's good for business. Our heart centers across the United States, our diabetes centers, they're all flourishing because of the new culture that we have. But let me show you kind of what's really happened here. If this culture has really shifted, we should be able to see the shift. And in fact, how has your food changed? Well, your fast food is more common. The serving sizes is much bigger than the salt, sugar, and fat. Well, we talked about that. When you look at the data, this is the number of meals, percentage of meals eaten outside the home. So right now, almost half of every meal in the United States is consumed outside the home. We eat out because we can. And it's hot, it's convenient, it's delicious, it's really cheap. So we do. We eat out. When you eat out versus eat at home, you eat less fruits, fewer vegetables, fewer whole grains, more saturated fat, and more added sugar. And if you look at just the overall amount of food that we consume, here's the changes in added fats over the last 50 years. Here's the changes in corn syrup that we consume in the last 50 years. Here's the amount of cheese that we consume over the last 50 years. Cheesecake Factory. They have dialed in the science, balancing salt, sugar, and fat to a level never before seen. Because when you come, you will taste, you will enjoy, you will crave, and you will return to do it again, and again, and again. Because it's the way we respond. These are truly addictive patterns that we have. So we do. And we don't really think much about it, because it was delicious. Really, I'm really not that overweight, Dr. Aldana. I'm really pretty good. As a country, we're in trouble, because bacon is so darn good. Then we don't move around much. How's your physical activity doing? I'm not active anymore, because I'm sitting in my car all night long. We commute, we sit, we don't act, we're not active. So this cultural shift is here. And now it's starting to throw out some side effects. Some stuff is happening to us. Because our diet has changed, the quality of our food and the quantity of our food has changed, our physical activity patterns have changed. This is the amount of adults getting the benefits of physical activity over the last 10 years. It's pretty flat. We're not much more active than we were several years ago, because we're experiencing what I call the dark side of capitalism. Nobody intended it to be this way. It just kind of became this way. I don't think Cheesecake Factory set out to create a diabetes epidemic. I don't think Pepsi intended to make an obese nation. They're just trying to maximize profits. And yet, here we are, having a meeting about this topic because food manufacturers are happy, the government's pretty happy, the American Dietetic Association, the people who should know better, make a lot of money from industry, they're happy, pharmaceuticals are happy. Our healthcare system, it's not a healthcare system, it's a disease care system. They're pretty happy. Look at the prettiest, fanciest, most expensive buildings in any city in America, and I'll show you a healthcare center. Labor-saving devices, and then lastly, it's greed. So here's the problem. This is the percentage of adults in the US who are now obese. It's at the highest, overweight. We're now at the highest point in human history. We have more body fat at any other time. We're at 73% of all adults. That's going to be in 2020. It's not just Mapleton. It's not Salt Lake City. It's not Portland, Oregon. It's Korea, France, Austria, Canada, England. It's the side effect of capitalism. It's us exporting our culture to all the other places in the world. And last week, I met with the Secretary of Health in Brazil, because here's Brazil. They're just like us. They've adopted our culture with gusto, and now we're in trouble. Well, what about Utah? Here's your Utah data for obesity. Right now, it's 24.4% of all adults in Utah are clinically obese. That's the Utah trend data. That's the national data. So as of today, we have the heaviest population in state history. And next year, it will be a new record. Because that trend is going to continue. Because the current culture is so powerful, and the status quo is so strong. These little church meetings, my books, my companies, my efforts, I'm not going to turn this thing around yet. This thing is going to get way worse before it gets better. It's going to get much worse. We can zoom in on you, Utah residents, and say, okay, what about Utah Mormons? They're less active than non-LDS. They don't move around as much. They weigh 10.5 pounds more on average. Mormons weigh 10.5 pounds more than non-Mormons in the state of Utah. We eat fewer fruits and vegetables, and we're pretty much equal to the rest of the nation on all other health risks. So our diet is as secular as it can possibly get. Now our church believes, and our doctrines are not secular, but our nutrition habits and our physical activity habits are. We are a secular people in every other way. This is a good friend of mine. He works at Loma Linda University where the Seventh-day Adventists hang out. He told me this quote several years ago, and I never forgot it. He said, "You Mormons have the code of health, but you don't follow it. You're just like the rest of Americans. You've become secular." And at first I was kind of mad, and then I thought about it, and then I said, you know what? You're exactly right. We have the temple recommend questions in the church. We have the word wisdom, and it's full of the don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do those. It completely, in all other ways, ignores the do's. So for what it's worth, his comment is correct. We have the code, but we really don't follow it. It's just one of those things that's in our books. We don't really... But coffee and tea, holy cow, that'll send you to hell pretty quick. But whatever you eat, we're okay. It's different. We've changed. So let's summarize this. Our poor health is a side effect of our Western culture. Our culture is not going to change on its own. It's a side effect of our capitalistic system, and it's going to get worse. Now that I've given you the gloom and the doom, and my prognostications about the future, the real question is, well, what do we do about it? How do we solve this problem? This is why I quit my job at BYU. I wanted to help solve this problem. We know how to solve this problem. I think most of you don't know exactly how to solve this problem. It really comes down to there's always a group of people that has one person who seems to be able to have a healthy lifestyle despite our culture. There's always one person in a group, they're a little different. They like tomatoes as their favorite food. They like rutabagas and eggplant as their favorite food. There's always these crazy people among us who exercise in the morning, who get up and have whole grains, who they like ice cream, they just have a little bit, or they grow their own vegetables. Those are the really weird ones. There's always these people out there who seem to buck the trend and do it right, despite our cultural pressure and the money being made by society and our culture. They seem to be able to rise above. So how is it that these few people, and this couple, for example, how is it they're able to not get sucked into this culture like the rest of us? How do they do that? That's a good question. Well, this particular couple has been very successful at it because they live right here. That's where they live. It's a little island. So they've just pretty well put everybody, they don't live there. They don't live there at all. It's another metaphor. But what they really do is they live on an island. They live on a cultural island that is different from the culture that surrounds them. And maybe it's just a couple, and they live on this little island, one family. In my line of work, maybe it's an employer who wants to do things differently. He's worried about productivity and worker morale and health for his employees. He's got his employees, and they've created a larger island at their work site where they do things differently. There's no vending machines. We're going to help you make healthy choices. We're going to give you time off to exercise at work. We're going to bring your spouse and significant other in to talk about eating healthier and to avoid the culture that surrounds us. We're going to talk to the local restaurants and have them offer tomatoes and eggplant when they're in season. We're going to do some things to create a new culture. Now, the thing that's really hard for me in all of this is I've testified on Capitol Hill. I've met with Senator Hatch. I've met and I've worked with the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I've been to the top of government. I've been in all the committees. As much as I really, really wish something good would come out of our federal government, I'm not seeing it right now. My confidence in our congressional ability to get stuff done is pretty low right now. State governments, sometimes. This is not going to happen from the top down. Nobody's going to start introducing policies, rules, regulations, incentives to make this easier for you. It's going to come from the bottom up. It's going to come from you and me and other people who decide to create our own little cultures and we pull it together. I wish it were otherwise, but I just don't see it happen. And I'm not going to spend any more time in Washington working towards it. So how do you create these islands? I could spend, again, a year talking about this piece of it. We boil it down to 3 simple things. This is really, really simple. First off, you got to have a reason to change. You got to have new skills, new tools, new strategies, new skills, and you got to have help from other people. That's it. That's 200 years of behavior change research and science all rolled into 3 little steps. Because unless you really want to change, it's not going to happen. Because bacon tastes so good. You against Cocoa Puffs, it's not a chance. This is a David versus Goliath battle. And if every day you go to work and there's cake in the break room, we're doomed. Because this cake is just too darn good. Every day you go to a church function and we have really, really unhealthy foods at some of our church functions, it's tough. Well, I don't really have a reason to change, except next week is my 20th year high school reunion, and I want to get back into that dress I wore when I was in high school. That might be a reason to change. Death is a good reason to change. Or fear of death. But even then, sometimes it's not enough. So we talk about incentives, we talk about lots of things to get people to want it. You've got to be able to look in the mirror and say, I don't want to be this way anymore. We've got to learn new skills. You know, you can grow tomatoes, and they taste delicious. That's a skill, and this group's all about skills. You can also eat out at certain restaurants and still eat healthy. That's a skill. You can cook delicious meals at home. That's a skill. You can learn to be physically active in Utah in January. That's a skill. It's not easy to do. You with the right skills, with the right motivation, and then you've got to have help. So I walk every morning, ride my bike during the day. I go up to the canyon. I see the walking ladies all the time. You know what I'm talking about. There's dozens of them. They're all out walking. They're almost always with someone or some dog. When I say support from others, I have a dog. She's my biggest single source of peer pressure to go, because she gives me those eyes, she wags that tail. I don't really want to go, I don't have much choice. That's part of it. So I know this is a very big simplification about where this is at, but my wife has built a moat around our house. She calls it contraband. There's certain contraband we're not allowed to bring home. Why? Because she'll eat it, and she loves it. So we just don't, if you don't buy it, you don't bring it home. If all you have in the refrigerator is healthy foods, it's a lot tougher to do this. It's about cultural shifts. It's about changing our environment. It's about knowing what to pick and what not to pick. General rules of thumb. You should eat like your great-great-grandparents ate. That pretty well sums it up. They didn't eat anything like you today. They didn't eat the foods you eat today. The foods you eat today didn't exist 85 years ago. Food's close to its natural form. And we can get into all the variety. That's a very, very broad simplification of it. But
You're going to talk about wheat and the changes in wheat since the 1800s.
changes in wheat. I can talk about wheat. I can talk about corn. I can talk about high fructose corn syrup, additives, terpene, phytochemicals, artificials, genetically modified, organic, non-organic, lots of questions. Eat food close to its natural form. We just solved 90% of the problems right there. Wheat is pretty close to its natural form. It might be genetically modified, might be a little bit different color, but Wonder Bread, white flour, is a few steps away from its natural form. You get where I'm going with that. So these little islands form. Me and my family have an island. I know the Blomquist family really well. They have an island at their house, because Lisa's always making healthy foods. They've created an island of health. We've had some board functions where we've brought some healthy foods. People have freaked out. That's okay. It's a slow, gradual change. I see more and more restaurants offering food close to its natural form. I see more and more people come to events like this, learning to grow food in its natural form. So the islands are starting to form. Eventually, my little island, in my little world, starts to connect with other little islands. This meeting is a perfect example of these little islands connecting, where we start to build this thing from the ground up with consumer support, with community-supported agriculture. And your food markets is starting to move against Goliath ever so slowly. The perspective that I'm trying to share with you today is that this is a big uphill battle. It's one that's going to get much, much worse. But if you can make small, concerted changes in behavior, really amazing things happen. And that's where I spend most of my time working, is what are the things that happen? Here's a group of people just like you. These were 360 people from the community of Rockford, Illinois, that we did some clinical trials with. We got them in groups and we talked about how to make healthy choices, how to be active, how to make eggplant taste delicious, how to eat food in its natural form, how to reduce my saturated fat and my trans fats. Help them do that. I just want to show you what happened. Okay, the red bar, this is them at baseline for their vegetables and fruit servings. This is how many servings of fruits and vegetables at baseline. They were at 4.5. This invisible bar, that's the control group. So in 6 weeks, they increased their vegetable and fruit servings a whole bunch. So we got a big change in what they were eating. Their whole grains had a nice big jump in the whole grains that they were eating. We got a big reduction in the amount of saturated fat that they were eating. We got their physical activity, their steps, to go from 40,000 to 54,000, and to maintain those activity patterns clear out 18 months. Here's what I like. Look at their blood pressure. Ideal high or dangerous high, that's how much their blood pressure dropped. 13 to 30 point change in blood pressure. That's more than medication can cause. Systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure drops like crazy. Total cholesterol. There's no medication here. The only thing that has changed is their lifestyle. The only thing that has changed is their culture. They adopted new cultural habits. They made an island of health, and they are no longer hypercholesterolemia. They are no longer diabetic, because they're diabetics. They dropped 50 points on their blood glucose. Now, this is way bigger than you get with medications, and it doesn't have any side effects. And the only thing that changed was their culture, their behaviors. They've been able to do this differently than everybody else. Here on the left is an anterior coronary artery. And right there, it's almost completely pinched off. It's almost completely blocked. That's that same artery 6 months later after they changed their lifestyle. There's no stent, there's no medication. That's just lifestyle change. That's a 55-year-old male. 65-year-old female, hers is right here. You see that really narrow spot? It's almost completely pinched off. That's that same artery 6 months later after she changed her lifestyle. So 2 things. 1, it would appear that you can teach old dogs new tricks. It's not too late. 2, it would appear that there is such a thing as repentance in this process. You can change and we can reverse some of this. Some of it we cannot. Cancers, can't do it. Diabetes, yeah. Heart disease, yeah. Cancer is a different animal. Once it's on its way, all the healthy eating in the world isn't going to change that. It's time for some heavy-duty nuclear warfare on those guys. So I'm going to summarize it with this piece right here. And we're going to take a few questions. This kind of sums it up. I did 2 presentations up in the church office building. I was hoping that maybe some people in the leadership position would maybe start to have more discussions in the church about this topic. I didn't really see that, but they're thinking about it. Before President Hinckley died at a Christmas party, he said, one thing I really, really wish we could do is all lose a little weight. That was his holiday wish for the church. We never heard, outside of the party, we never heard much about that. And, you know, they got lots of other things to worry about. Saving souls is a big thing for everybody around this church. I get it. We should talk more about this, but we don't. The reason we should talk about it is this. In Utah, the average lifespan is 76. And throughout your life, you're going to get sick. You get illness. We call this morbidity. You get sick and better, up and down. And somewhere out here towards the end of your life, you're going to have a critical event. It could be a bypass. It could be a breast cancer diagnosis. It could be Alzheimer's. At which point in time, your health is going to get a little worse and a little worse and a little worse, and then you die. Now, I did check the data. I did check the death data in the state of Utah. It hasn't changed in a long, long time. The death data in Utah is still 1 per person. Mortality rate is 1 per person. Everybody's got one. It's only a matter of when and how. And I know the when. The when is 76. How, I can describe as a group. But that is going to start with about a 7-year period of relatively poor health, and then you pass away. This is where most of our state is right now, and it's getting worse. This thing's actually, in many parts of the country, this is actually shortening. What if you were to create your own culture of health at your home, at your work, at your church? What if you really were able to fight back against the cultural pressures and do this differently? What happens to this? Well, we know you're going to live longer. We know we can make it to 86 and even higher. We have good groups of data out this far. We also know that you're going to have the bumps and bruises and illness of life. Life is going to hit you. In fact, this period right here, when it's really tough, this is when you're an adult and you have teenage children. It can almost kill you. It's that bad. You're still going to get a critical event. You're still going to have end-of-life illness, and you're still going to pass away. But compare the 2 of those. This is where we are. 76, preceded by about 7 years of declining health. The bottom one is where we'd like you to be. That end-of-life illness is 1/3 less. The technical term is called the compression of morbidity, where we compress the end-of-life years of illness into a much shorter period of time. But what the church really gains from this is that piece right there. This is 10 to 20 years on your new timeline where you have a high-quality life and good health. What does the church do with millions of people who now have 10 to 20 years of high-quality life after retirement? You think the sister missionaries and the new age adjustments have changed things? That would have a huge impact. Because the number one reason seniors don't go now is because they're on that timeline. Because as soon as I'm retired and ready to go, I have entered this period of my life, and it's just too hard to go. This opens up all kinds of possibilities. So to me, this is really what we're shooting for. This is why we do this. I will go one step further. I hate this end-of-life thing right here. There's no appeal to that whatsoever. I want to get rid of that. And what I want to do is I want to get that curve right there. I want to bend that down. What I want to do is I want to be 94 years old. I'm going to be up at Sundance snowboarding with my great-grandchildren. Right? 94, snowboarding, big powder day. I'm going to lose my balance, hit a tree, boom, right there. It's over. So that I'm going to compress my end-of-life illness into 4 seconds. It's over. If you think about Sister Hinckley, Remember how Sister Hinckley passed away? President Hinckley worded it like this: her clock just ran down. A week before she died, she was in the Bahamas visiting the saints with the prophet. She came home, she didn't feel well, 3 days later she was dead. That's it. That's exactly what we're talking about. That's what this is really all about. So, having said that, right now, this is where we are. The river is a mess. It's going to get worse. It's oozing. A lot of people are really happy. A few people, me, some others, I'm not happy with it. I'd like to turn this thing around. It's bad. So, what do we know? It's a side effect of our Western culture. It's not going to change on its own. The only solution is to create our own little mini cultures of health, our little islands of health. Eventually, these islands connect. Then and only then are we going to turn this whole thing around. I know that's a lot and that much time, but we want to hear from Ray. And I want Derek to introduce him, to tell him his story. And then when he's done, we can take a few questions. Is that all right?
That's great. Ray, come on up. Cue it up. So, what was the date? What was the date you had your heart attack?
August 17th,
August 17th. That was my
Sunday
birthday.
morning.
That was my birthday.
Give him a...
Wait, that's not my birthday. So,
7:30 in the morning.
the way it played out is we had a pretty cool, I can't remember what we were covering that month, but it was something he had talked about coming to, and he didn't come. So, about 2 weeks after, I called up and said, hey, Ray, you missed the class. What's up? And to that, you said,
I'm laying on my back. Yeah, I just had a heart attack, yeah.
you had a
This is
message.
second.
And you can tell in bits and pieces, but literally, he lives down the river bottoms. He's not a Mapleton resident, but we consider him one of our own. He comes so often.
Well, I'm in charge of the preparedness in our ward, and so we've lived there almost 5 years now. And it's so when I found out what Derek was doing here, my son's father-in-law lives in this stake, I guess, and I think it's your stake, right? So yeah, they live in this stake, and so they had been really talking well about all the different things that you were doing. And of course, our stake is doing zero. And so I wanted to get where the action is and find out what you're doing. And so I've been following this all along. And it's been great. It's been really great. But I appreciate him calling because he was the one that put me on to a film that's been put out. And it's called Forks Over Knife. How many have seen that? Anybody?
What is it?
It's called Forks Over Knife. Nobody on this side? Two. What we're doing now is we're eating what's put in front of us. I mean, anybody that's watched TV at night, you know, that all the best restaurants are showing this thing in high definition of what they want to give you. It's got all the calories and all the grease and everything with it, right? I mean, and you're sitting there kind of hungry now because you had dinner at 5 or 6, and now you're starving, and you look at that lobster and you say, man, I got to have some of this. So, it is really tough to get yourself on an island, especially we have 15 grandchildren living within a block. So we have a different situation than I've ever had in 5 years. We did 4 different missions, and so we were out and about, you know, even still, though, we were eating out an awful lot. And that kind of helped on the second heart attack, I think. And I think we all know what we're supposed to eat. I love reading the scriptures, and I know that, you know, eating that section really well. But I'll tell you this last time, I really, after looking at the Forks Over Knife, my son ended up making a few bucks, and so he forced me and my wife into working out with him and his trainer. He has a trainer, he has the same weight problem I do, because I mean, we ate too much in our life. It's not hereditary so much, it's just eating everything in sight. And so sweets and grease and all the rest of it. And so when we came home for our mission, he said, you're going to be at the house, which is across the street, 162 steps, you know. And so I walk across at 7 in the morning, 7:30, and we have this trainer that helps us get motivated. Because a lot of times if you try doing it on yourself, you know, you buy the equipment, and you go about a week, and all of a sudden it's the end of it. You use it for a hanger for your clothes. But, working out that hour and a half every morning helped us a lot. a lot. My blood pressure went down about 20 points just with that. But what really knocked it down, almost 50 points, was going to this base diet. And when I brought my paper in to prove it to Derek.
So here's the timeline. So,
Yeah. It was
You
about
go
6
once.
weeks. It was about 6 weeks.
so 6 weeks later, after he starts this new lifestyle Steve's been talking about, what was the result?
Well, I went from about 185 on my cholesterol down to 121. That's a lot, guys. I mean, that's what every doctor, my cardiologist, which lives around the corner from me, it was great. I was on the table in 14 minutes. And so having a blocked artery, that was really critical. It saved my heart. My first time I had a heart attack was out in the middle of Lake Powell. And it took me over an hour in a helicopter flying over all the Grand Canyon to get to where the hospital was in St. George. So big difference. I had about 10% heart damage. Now it came back over a couple of years. It actually came back and it was okay. But still, I didn't really have this forks over knife diet. And it's been really hard to stay on that for me because I've got so many people around me. I don't have that diet, unfortunately. But I do a lot better, and especially when you understand the spirituality of the 89th section. If you really understand that we are vessels, and that we're to, our least amount of stewardship is to take care of this temple that we've been given. And it's so easy every year to gain that extra 5 pounds. And all of a sudden, by 10 or 15 years, we've got 50 pounds on us that we're carrying around. When we left our mission in Palmyra, New York, I was weighing about 210 pounds. And so when I got on this diet here, this is not a bad little diet. It's talking a lot about what Steve's talking about. The idea of getting down in sugar. He's basically a low sugar base, just to count your sugars. And also, you only have about 15 grams of sugar per day. Now, if you look at your breakfast, there could be 50 on most calories, grams, about 50.
Here's the good news. We'll get to Q&A. Here's the good news. He went in 6 weeks from a major event to, he wanted to, can't say perfect health, but much better health, 185 down to 121. Steve showed you those blocked arteries in 6 months. So whether it's 6 weeks, that may be unusual, but in 6 months, we all have the capacity. But also, like you mentioned, it's just like when we talk about Seed Saver. I can only do so much, he can only do so much. But collectively, as we try to not only create, but strengthen this island, and a huge part of that is growing our own food, sharing our own food, but it's the moral support, and I love it. I like Steve. He goes up earlier than I do because I never see him up there, but I bike and run up in White Campground, and you see these groups of ladies. My wife is one of them. What an awesome culture. And then to come home, instead of hopping into bacon and eggs, hopping into whole grains or fabulous fruits and vegetables straight out of the garden. That's really what this is about. And this, when I shared this with Steve about Ray, Steve's like, I hear that all the time as he travels the country. So it's something that's not just a fluke. It can and it will happen for every one of us. It's just get it going, stay with it, lock arms with those around us, stick with it, and the health.
Let's do a little test here. I want you to guess. He'll give the number, but let's say I want you to guess how old I am. How many say?
65.
You say 65. How many agree that 65 is it? Nobody?
75. 62.
62.
74.
70. Did the 4 missions tip it a little bit? I retired at 62, so I'll be 73 in another month. So. Okay. So, but I can fight, not as good as him, but I got arms.
We got to
See, he's got an 8.
I'm 87.
There you go. Heading around.
Hey, with that, let's bring Steve up. Ray's here. I'm going to give my mic to Steve, and And those of you who need to be excused, glad we came. Otherwise, we're going to do some Q&A for as long as it makes sense. Then we'll go to